On this episode of Jets Uncovered, we'll update the latest free agent moves from the New York Jets, take a fresh look at their depth chart and what their remaining needs in free agency and the NFL draft should be, as Jets Uncovered on the Our Lads Football Radio Network for Free Agency Day 2018 starts now. All right, Wednesday, March 14, 2018. I'm Greg DePalma. Welcome to another edition of Jets Uncovered on the Our Lads Football Radio Network at ourlads.com. All right, so Jan, regarding the all-important quarterback position for the New York Jets, I said on our free agency preview show on Monday that my wish was for the Jets to pass on Kirk Cousins and instead go sign both Teddy Bridgewater and Josh McCown and then target another QB with their first pick in the draft. So 2 down, 1 to go, and I couldn't be more pleased, obviously, then with how they handled that position. And also, to tell you the truth, so far what they're doing overall on the roster right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say for the most part, it's a solid B at a minimum for Mike McKinnon. He's pivoted where necessary. He's been aggressive also where necessary. I mean, you mentioned that you didn't want Cousins. I was a bit more pro Cousins than you were, but when it comes down to the dollars and cents, Minnesota decided to basically give him probably around the similar kind of money the Jets were going to give him, maybe slightly less in terms of given that the Jets have so much cap room. But he made a career decision where he felt that for him, Minnesota was the better option in terms of from a career perspective, especially given the weapons that they have there now, and opted to take the 3 years, about $86 million fully guaranteed.
Yeah,
that's
crazy.
Obviously the key is that fully guaranteed for quarterbacks and other positions moving forward, because the NFL has been known for years as not for long, and guarantees is really what we should be looking at in terms of the money that we talk about for these guys and then the dead cap space. So once he did that, they moved on to the plan B that you recommended, bringing in Josh McCown for $10 million, which is a bump over the $6 million he earned last year, and then Teddy Bridgewater for a 1-year deal worth at a minimum $5 million and a potential maximum, if all the incentives are met, of $15 million. And McCown is also a 1-year deal. So neither one of those moves should preclude them adding a quarterback in the draft.
Sure.
But it'll be interesting to see if they decide that the primary focus now in the draft is going to be that quarterback.
Yeah, I think what it does is at least it doesn't completely hamstring them, where if they have a couple of guys in mind and say the Bills, say the Browns go ahead and take a quarterback number 1, and then the Bills, which they are going to move up. We knew that since the beginning of last season when we talked about it on this show. With all the picks that they were acquiring even before the season started, that we knew this was going to be their intention. They've already now moved up to 12. They will move up. And it just depends on where they will move up, and it depends on how much they're willing to give. And I think if the Jets just say, you know what, all right, if you want to give the farm, we're not going to give the farm, at least it puts them in a position where hopefully they've got that backup plan for another quarterback, because one of the quarterbacks would be available. And if for some reason they say, you know what, the last 2 quarterbacks on the list, we don't really like them all that much at that spot, maybe we'll go down a little bit later on in the draft and take a quarterback there. Then they have a little bit more of an opportunity to do that because they do have Bridgewater, and you never know if you do grab a quarterback even a little bit later on, even if it's early second round, there'll be some decent quarterbacks there. The Mason Rudolphs, maybe even Kyle Lauletta or Mike White, who looked really good in the Senior Bowl. So that gives them a little bit more flexibility, and because we don't know nobody knows what to expect from Teddy Bridgewater.
That's the great unknown, and that's probably why a big portion of that contract is incentive-based, which makes the most sense, because if he does prove that he is fully healthy, 2 years removed from the devastating injury he suffered, and he proves to be back to where he was before, then you could see him progressing to be that future franchise guy. I'm not quite sure if he can get to that level. He sure looked like a little bit that he was getting to that level after his 2015 season. But the injury has clearly set him back because he saw no action, at least in terms of starts, for the last 2 years as he rehabbed that devastating injury. But what you do have is you have a guy who's a risk, but a risk with potentially substantial upside, and you balance it out against a career veteran who, at a minimum, will prove to be a nice mentor to Bridgewater. And if they do go ahead and bring in that quarterback, if the guy they want in the draft is there at their position, or they've identified somebody and they aggressively move up to get him.
Yeah, and look, Bridgewater. Look, there's two things with Bridgewater. The major asset is he's a very, very accurate quarterback. Of course, the big issue is even before the draft, as he had an injury history. But look, you can't really think about the injury situation when you draft the quarterback, which the Jets will. That just puts you in a position where now you're going to have even more time to develop, that there's not going to be any pressure no matter who that quarterback is. That quarterback knows he is not starting opening day. So in the big lights and glamour of New York, there won't be all that pressure on that guy to start opening day. And then it goes on to Bridgewater, because I know from what we've heard so far that McCown will be the starter going into camp. I don't have a problem with that, because naming a starter going into camp doesn't mean anything. And I think it's a nice gesture based on what McCown did for the team last year. And, of course, with him being a leader, you should do that. But, look, if Bridgewater actually performs the way that the best case scenario, then Teddy Bridgewater is going to be the starter on opening day. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. So, but if Bridgewater looks like, for whatever reason, that he's not getting things right, he needs a little bit more time. And I would tell you the truth, I got to believe that the chances are more likely that the only way Bridgewater wouldn't be our starting quarterback on opening day is if he gets hurt again. That's what I think. I'd be shocked if he wasn't our quarterback opening day.
The scheme that they put in under Bates, whether or not it mirrors the scheme that the Jets used this past season, or with Morton, or whether or not it's a new type of scheme. In addition, what are you with Robbie Anderson? Is he back? Is Emmanuel fully healthy? Are you a down the field deep throwing team, which may not fit Bridgewater's skill set because he's not that accurate in terms of the long passes? Are you more of a short intermediate type passing one, which fits his scheme? Because if you look at it, McCown has clearly got the arm strength to go deep. And then, look, if that franchise quarterback is there, or you've identified that franchise quarterback, then you need to still move, I would say, hell and high water to go get that guy. Because neither one of these guys, McCown is definitely not the guy. And Bridgewater, there at least is the potential for him to be the guy, depending on how healthy he is.
Well, what is that, though? What is that hell or high water mark, though, to you? What would you be willing to give up in order to move up? And let's say you're just willing to move up and get Mayfield, that, right? Because Mayfield's the only guy that you're going to do that for, right?
For me, well, again, Darnold's maybe a guy that it depends on who the Jets have identified as being that guy, right? So if Baker Mayfield is the guy, and they truly believe that that Cleveland is going to take him number one, or if Cleveland isn't going to take him number one and somebody else is going to trade up to one or to number two, and go ahead and get that guy, move up from the Giants to get that guy, then they may have to move. I would not move the number one next year. What I consider
you're not going to get it then.
Second two.
No, you're not
getting it. My second two and another two to move up, most probably.
Yeah, but you're not going to get it though. You're going to have to give up a really high pick. From 6 to 2, you have to give up a 1. I mean, I don't think there's any way around that. That's the tricky point. But I'm not saying that that's not something I wouldn't do. I'm just saying I think that's what you have to give up. So if it's me, and I know that's why I was asking if it's Mayfield or not, because I'm just saying it from our point of view. I mean, sure, we don't know what the Jets think, but I'll tell you right now. Let's just go both scenarios. If it's anybody other than Mayfield, then no, I don't want them to go ahead and give up the farm. If it's Mayfield and you can give up next year's first round pick and another pick, I don't know what it is, third. I don't know if you have to give up a second, but third, I'm doing it.
Even if the concern is that this year is going to be another growth year and you're giving up a top 10 pick in next year's draft.
Yeah, because I'm looking already at next year's crop, and I don't think next year's crop is going to be like this year's crop. So yeah, I would do that. But again, me personally, I would do it knowing I'm going after Mayfield. but I wouldn't want us to be sitting there doing the draft show and hear the Jets giving up all these picks, including next year's first, to move up to get a quarterback, and we have to sit there and wait to find out who that name is. That will drive me nuts, because that's like a 50-50 or 35% chance it's going to be Baker Mayfield, because it could be any one of those four guys. And I don't, that would scare the hell out of me, to tell you the truth. But it is something that we're going to have to, I don't really think that they're going to do that. I just, again, because look at Chicago. Chicago gave up an awful lot just to move up from 2-1 last year. So that's why I'm a little bit afraid of that kind of a move. But again, like we said, I think what's so good about getting Bridgewater is I don't think that you necessarily now have to go ahead and make that kind of move. I think you could, if the Bills want to give up the farm because they have additional farm picks, then go ahead and let them, I guess. I mean, it's stay where you are. Pick one of those other guys, and I think that'll be fine for me. I've said it before. I like Mayfield, of course, but I'm not going to be upset if they get one of those other quarterbacks.
It'll be interesting to kind of see how they determine they think the draft is going to go, who they think might move up to get certain players. Is Saquon Barkley going to go number one? Is Nelson going to go number two? Is a team
that would be
Cleveland
nice.
And the Giants willing to move down out of that spot, potentially costing themselves a shot at those players in order to get the extra picks? I think that's kind of the bigger key more than anything else, because given what Cleveland's done signing Carlos Hyde today doesn't take them out of the Saquon Barkley. They've also gone out and obviously got themselves a quarterback. That doesn't take them out of the quarterback race. And if they truly believe that they want Barkley, and the Giants now with signing Jonathan Stewart, and the question is to whether or not they're going to take a quarterback, decided they want to take Quentin Nelson number two.
No, the Giants have to take Barkley.
To go from 6 to 3, or
crazy.
Have that pick of 4 quarterbacks sitting there at 3, 4, 5, and 6 going in a row, and depending on if they want to move up to Indy to get that pick.
I think the Giants would be crazy if they had Barkley on the board and selected a guard. I mean, I think they'd be nuts. But it could happen. I mean, and I hope so, because it's definitely a bonus for the Jets if Quentin Nelson is drafted in the top 5. I mean, that's going to be good, because there's Minkah Fitzpatrick that's sitting there. And as we talk about the DBs, this is going to be the next interesting situation for the Jets, because what we now need to see as Jet fans is either signing Mo Claybourne and or Tyrann Mathieu. They can't come out of Tyrann Mathieu and Mo Claybourne and not get either one. They can't. Now, I don't know if they can afford both, but they can't get out of there because there's nobody else left. And there's no way that they can say, okay, we basically swapped Claiborne for Tremaine Johnson, gave Johnson, who's probably going to be earning twice as much than Claiborne. I don't think that makes any sense to me, because I don't think you improve your secondary all that much. So you must re-sign either Claiborne or Mathieu or both in order to improve that secondary the smart way, especially with the money that they've already spent on Tremaine Johnson. So that would be the goal. And Mathieu would make a lot of sense with the Jets. I mean, they've got the cap space. Bowles has got the personal relationship with them. It just, and then if they do they cut screen? I mean, because they could still, let's keep in mind, they could still save about, I think his cap hit is $8.5 million. And the dead cap space is only a couple mil, 2.5. So if the Jets actually go get Tyrann Mathieu, they could say, well, we'll save a little bit of money. We'll get rid of screen and we'll put Mathieu in at that slot spot, and then we'll resign Mo Claybourne.
Yeah, I mean, if you could utilize the cap space that way and clear up the room, I mean, look, I would love to bring back Claybourne. I mean, to me, I think the injury risk is still there, and you've only seen him do it for one season with the Jets. And granted, he slowed down late, because I think partly, as we discussed, we felt that his first year back in a full capacity probably had an impact on him in terms of physically. But I would love to have Claybourne back. And then, everybody keeps talking about Tyrann Mathieu, Honey Badger, a excessive signing, given the other guys you have there. And my view is Bowles, and I think the defensive coordinator, will figure out a way to utilize Mathieu in multiple different situations.
Yes.
If they're able to bring him here. You bring in the talent, and then you figure out how to utilize that talent.
Yes. And look, I wouldn't even I would think it would make sense if you brought in Mathieu and Claybourne to cut screen, because you could use that extra, say, $6 million to probably just give it to Mathieu, because I can't imagine how much more money he's going to make, or even Claybourne, because of the injury situation. And that would make the most sense. But yeah, you bring in Mathieu and sign Claybourne, then you didn't even have a problem. The only way that you have, not even it's a problem, but you wouldn't even have an extra DB on the roster. The only way that would happen is if you kept Screen and re-signed and then signed Mathieu and Claybourne. And even if that happened, yeah, I'm with you. You'll find a way. Bowles has always talked about he wants that secondary. That secondary is premium. And for his defense. And I really think that that's why re-signing Claybourne and maybe even bringing in Mathieu, I don't think that's a far-fetched idea, because there, as we talked about the other day, there are not, unless they make a move with Denver, there really aren't any pass rushing linebackers out there. There just aren't. And because of that, and Chubb is probably not going to be there. You're going to draft a quarterback anyway. So if you're not going to be able to get that stud rushing pass rusher for your defense, then the next best thing, make sure you are loaded in the secondary. And that would be one hell of a bonanza if they could find a way to fit both Mathieu and Claybourne along with Jermaine Johnson back there. And by the way, I was setting that up because of Minkah Fitzpatrick. So let's keep in mind that even if they decide on one of the two between Mathieu and Claybourne instead of both, then that still leaves the possibility that if they don't get the quarterback they like and Fitzpatrick is sitting there at 6, that they maybe go, okay, we have no problem then drafting Minkah Fitzpatrick.
I know you're very high on Fitzpatrick, and I like him a lot, but I do think there are probably other bigger needs that they can fill rather than going that direction, in my opinion.
Well, it all depends. Yeah, but again, there's no pass rusher. Nobody picks a defensive lineman on a 3-4 defense unless he's Reggie White, and there's nobody available. So that's out. Linebacker's out. Quentin Nelson, if he's off the board. If he's on the board, then fine. If he's off the board, okay, there's no other offensive lineman. That's out. We just said if the quarterback's not in play, that's out. Barkley would be off the board. That's out. So that's what I'm saying. I mean, unless you trade down, and I'm not opposed to that either. Well, if they can't get the quarterback they want and the decision is Fitzpatrick or trade down, I wouldn't be opposed to the Jets trading down and getting more picks. I'd be okay with that, especially if they don't get the quarterback at 6 and they want to get him a little bit later anyway. Then you might as well just go ahead and move down a little bit and accumulate more picks. Also, as far as the linebacker position, Demario Davis, it looks like he's going to sign with the Saints. Not sure what the whole contract situation is going to look like. Apparently, Davis will make a little bit more, I guess, than Williamson. But Williamson is somebody that is an elite run stuffer, very similar type of player as Davis is. A one-dimensional type of run stuffing linebacker. But the Jets felt that Williamson they just didn't want to pay Davis, even though I understand the contracts are probably a little similar. Maybe they're not. I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen it. I don't know how much is guaranteed to Davis for New Orleans compared to Williamson. But fact is, they decided to go with Williamson, and okay, I don't have a major problem with that. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, I think that Davis ended up with 3 years, $24 million, 18 guaranteed. Williamson, I believe, is 3 years, $22.5 million, $16 million guaranteed.
Yeah.
Fairly similar players. I think Davis, in my opinion, is probably a better pass rusher than Whitaker, and also clearly proved to be a locker room leader last year. So to me, it was a bit surprising that Jets opted to go ahead and sign Whitaker as opposed to just extending Davis. But what they also probably decided is Whitaker is 3 years younger. What's that?
Williamson.
Oh, sorry, Williamson. Sorry.
That's okay.
Saying Whitaker. A.B. Williamson, sorry. Well, they decided to go 3 years younger, which I think was probably a component.
That's important. Yes,
signings.
Exactly. That's important.
They're looking to get younger.
Yes, correct.
And then, the cap situation is relatively similar, but I guess they must feel out of Williamson that there's some additional growth in there that they haven't seen before, and that the scheme that they utilize will maximize his talents. My only concern with him is that he's more of a 2-down linebacker than a 3-down linebacker, and that's one of the things I'm a bit concerned about.
That's all right.
And also losing a little leadership in the locker room by losing Davis.
Yeah, the only thing with I'm all right with the 2 down because really Davis. I mean, when a third down, I mean Davis wasn't really a great third down linebacker anyway because again his only trade. Okay, like you said, all right, a little bit of better rusher, but really Davis's major trait was his run stuffing ability, and that's what Williamson does. And this is why we talked about more DBs. The more DBs you have, Williamson comes off the field on third down. You put in that extra DB, which is hopefully now going to be a really good player. And your your pass defense will now be better because you're going to have a better player out there covering guys than even Demario Davis would have been able to do. So, and like you said, I think that the other real important asset there is the youth. Because Davis would have been 32, I guess, by the time in the final year of his contract. That's getting up there. I mean, Williamson will still be 30 years old. So I think that makes a lot of sense in that department. As far as the offense, Isaiah Crowell, this doesn't surprise me because of the fact that it was more surprising hearing the Dion Lewis talk because Lewis was more of the mold like Powell and McGuire. Crowell gives them more of a physical between the tackles runner. So he's not a brute force by any stretch of the imagination, but he's still a physical between the tackles runner, which he will wind up being, the guy that more than likely is going to be their goal line guy, short yardage guy, and a guy that will pretty much be in the rotation, just like we saw last year with Forte. Now they get younger, and instead of an old Forte, we now have a younger Crowell. So I have no problem with this signing.
Yeah, it was interesting that there was some, obviously the other talk that had been around was Jarek McKinnon, who signed a 4-year, I think $32
million. Yeah, that's a lot of money. That was a lot of money
with San Francisco, and I think the money precluded the Jets being interested because the Jets were supposed to be one of the 3 finalists there. And then the question was going to be, okay, if you added Crowell, who really got an unbelievably reasonable deal, 3 years, $12 million, $4 million guaranteed, I think $2 million guaranteed against injury. So it's really a one plus year type of a contract. He's younger, a bit more of a physical back than probably Forte and also than Powell. McKinnon would have added another dimension, which at that point in time, then you'd have to figure they were going to have to move on and potentially trade Powell because there would have been no reason to have the 3 of them there. Now, with what happened, you go in with Crowell, who's more of a running back, Powell, who's more of a jack of all trades who can run but also receive, and McGuire, who we liked what we saw in the spot duty he was seeing last year, especially towards the latter part of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if they had another running back somewhere late in the draft as a flyer, but in terms of what they've added so far, I happen to like Crowell, especially on the dollars that they're talking about. McKinnon would have been nice, but would have precluded them keeping Powell, and the dollars just didn't make sense based upon what they're looking for.
And I'd rather have Powell. So, Powell definitely deserves to get the reps. He was a game breaker last year. I know the problem with him, though, is staying healthy, whether or not he, the wear and tear, and that's why you get Crowell, and that's why you have McGuire. And I do think if the right running back comes along still, like you said, maybe in the same spot they got McGuire last year, once again, there'll be good running backs available, 4th, 5th, 6th round. You can go ahead and do that. Nothing wrong with having 4 running backs on your roster. As far as the receiving situation, this is a little bit more tricky. Now, they didn't go out and get any of the top wide receivers out there. We talked about the fact that they still need a number 1, and there's no question about that. They're still going to have to find a number 1. And look, if they don't trade up and give up all their second-round picks, then they've got 2 second-round picks. There are some receivers that we've talked about before that could be chosen there that have the ability to possibly be number 1s down the road. So that's something to keep an eye on in the draft. There's no more of those guys available in free agency. The question is, what do they do with Robbie Anderson? I still, as I've said before, I still would just like for them to just cut the tie, cut the cord, just move on. I mean, I don't even know what they're still waiting for, to tell you the truth. Maybe they want to see if they are going to bring in another receiver. Maybe they'll wait till the draft, see if they do draft someone else, and then they figure, okay, now we got enough additional bodies, we can let him go. I'm kind of sick of his act. I think he needs to leave. At tight end, it looks like Severian Jenkins is going to leave more than likely, and that's okay because as we've been talking about, again, they want to pay him more. Fine, let other teams pay these guys more. No reason to overpay for Severian Jenkins. Interesting enough that Eric Ebron is now on the market. He was a very disappointing first-round draft pick. But just like Jenkins and like we said with Tyler Eifert, if you can get a Tyler Eifert or an Eric Ebron on the cheap, instead of spending your first round draft pick on them, like Cincinnati or Detroit, then, maybe that's something you do.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that at all. I mean, I'm an Eifert fan going back to Notre Dame, which I'm sure you can imagine. So I like Eifert. The only issue with Eifert, or the main issue with Eifert, has been health, that he's always been hurt.
Yep.
And that's adversely impacted in terms of his productions. With Ebron, it's been more production on the field, less so injury. Safarian Jenkins, the Jets, we talked about, had that 2-year, $8 million offer on the table. The rumor is they did up that offer in the last couple of days, but that didn't preclude Safarian Jenkins going out to Seattle for a in-person visit, and since he's from the area, there's a lot of connections there. Now with Jimmy Graham being gone and Graham going to Green Bay and signing there, that took the big name tight end off the market. So there's a lot of guys who are still available from the tight end market. I mean, Ebron and Eifert are probably the two bigger ones in terms of guys who are available based upon what we've seen in the marketplace so far. But I mean, I would not have a problem with Eifert. My concern with him is clearly the injury risk. So you'd have to back him up with adding a second tight end,
yep.
maybe a little bit more of a blocking tight end, because I think we all definitely feel that Eifert is probably a much more of a receiving tight end than a blocking tight end. So I would probably bring in somebody else who's a bit more on the one-sided type of a tight end from the blocking perspective, especially to use in the run game. And as you said, in terms of wide receivers, clearly the big receiver that went was Allen Robinson got big money, and then shortly thereafter, Sammy Watkins went, and both of those guys got big dollars, which we didn't expect the Jets to pay, especially Watkins. I think, if I remember correctly, the Watkins deal, I think it's close to 30 or 30 plus million of the 48 million he's getting is guaranteed.
Yeah,
and the Jets clearly weren't going to go in that direction.
Yeah,
I'm of the same viewpoint as you are in terms of Robbie Anderson. If even a small portion of what he supposedly said is true, regardless of if he was prompted or not prompted to say it, it's a bad image. And the Jets have had a couple of these instances: Dylan Donahue, Robbie Anderson, cornerbacks they brought in. I think Rashard Robinson they brought in last year from the 49ers. They had a similar issue. So these are things that McKinnon and management have to clean up. And as much as Anderson took a step forward last year, you can't have that kind of influence on the team, especially where you're looking to revamp the locker room and bring in some other leaders.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's sure. Guys like Anderson. See, Donahue, for me, that any kid can do that. I don't even put Donahue on the list with Robinson and Anderson. That's just a kid mistake. That's all. As far as Anderson and Robinson, all right, yeah, two black eyes. But what we have seen them do over the last year or two is completely transform that locker room. So yeah, we're not necessarily saying, outside of Sheldon Richardson and his crazy antics, it's not that they were guys that were getting in trouble with the law like Robbie Anderson and Robinson, or even Donahue, but there were still a lot of bad seeds in the locker room, viruses. And the Jets have done a great job of cleaning out those players out of that locker room. And matter of fact, even Long, the lineman that the Jets just picked up, this is a guy that, if you look back at his days in Nebraska, was a team captain. He was a finalist for the National Football Foundation Award, and it's an award about character and leadership. And these are the types of players, the Josh McCowns, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all the types of guys that they've been bringing in over the last couple of years. So I think what the media tries to do, as usual, is put Robbie Anderson out there and Donahue and Robinson, and the Jets have got a major problem with character issues. No, they don't. All right, they had major issues 2 years ago. They've got two guys on the entire roster that have issues. All right, and you know what? There's a lot of teams in the NFL that have issues with one or two guys, which is also why that I do agree and we both agree that Robbie Anderson needs to go. And we'll see how that gets worked out. But I don't think they need a number one wide receiver this year anyway. That's why I said if they draft a guy, develop him, maybe before the 2019 offseason, maybe you realize, you know what, I think we've got him. Whoever that is, I don't know, but maybe we've got him, whether it's a Nunwa develops into that guy or the rookie that they draft hopefully this year. And if they don't, then it's okay. That's a guy that we target in free agency next year or in the draft in 2019. But not every team in the NFL that wins championships have star-studded number one receivers. So that's just not a position I think the Jets have to worry about, especially because of the fact that depth-wise, there's a lot of talent there.
I think we all like the talent that they brought in. They also don't, as you mentioned, have the number one. So it'll be very interesting if you do lose Anderson, the direction you go in. There definitely is receivers this year. We talked about the running back position. It wouldn't shock me if they ended up going and taking the kid Jones out of USC in the second round. But a lot of chatter very early on that the Jets may be a landing spot for him, given his explosiveness and what he could provide. Now, granted, bringing in Crowell shouldn't preclude that because Crowell's not making enough money to basically preclude bringing in a talented running back like Jones if they go that route for USC. And as you mentioned, Long was a good acquisition. He's a guy who can play center and also play guard. He didn't rate particularly well from Pro Football Focus, so he did, in my opinion, if I understand correctly, got better as the year wore on. Definitely is an upgrade over what they had last year. I mean, Weston Richburg was one of the guys they were looking at, but Richburg signed a 5-year deal very early in, I would say, the quote-unquote the negotiating period, for lack of a better term. But in my opinion, getting Long is a nice addition. I mean, it took him out of the Ryan Jensen sweepstakes, although Jensen is rumored to be visiting. I think Indy is one. If I remember, it's either New Orleans or Tampa, I think, is the second team he's visiting. I mean, part of the reason they bowed out of the Jensen sweepstakes is they felt that he was going to be a bit too pricey. But in my opinion, that they should maybe explore that route, because if you can move Long to guard and put Jensen at center,
yeah, I agree.
You fill two holes in your offensive line that weren't filled before, and that to me is a much better use of cap space and maybe some of the other directions they've been talking about.
I will say this. I mean, the thing that I've really been proud about is that on just about everything we've talked about here of the guys that they haven't signed is that the Jets are now letting other teams overpay for players. And there might be a time like Tremaine Johnson. Okay, they gave him a lot of money. Did they overpay for him? You know what? I don't think so. I mean, really good players, the best cornerback on the market is going to get top dollar. So in that circumstance, I don't really think they overpaid for him. But other guys, I mean, Jensen, sure, I mentioned him a couple of months ago. He should be their top target. But if he's going to wind up getting more money than he's worth only because of the fact that he's the top guy available based on 1 year's production, then I'm saying, yeah, okay, you know what? I like the guy and we want to give him a little bit of money, but I'm not going to overpay a guy like that. The only way that I think it makes sense for the Jets to overpay anybody is if they have proven it over a few years, they're still in the prime of their careers, and they really do believe that they have seen enough of those guys that, okay, yeah, they are going to be a part of our nucleus moving forward. And if they don't believe and are that confident that Jensen can be that guy for that money, then go ahead, let another team pay for it. And I have no problem with that. But, and look, by the way, remember I mentioned this. I didn't think the Jets were going to do a whole lot on the offensive line. And the reason is Beachum can't get cut. So he has to play tackle. Where does Shell play? Tackle. So if Shell plays right tackle next year again, which he will, and Beachum plays left tackle again, which he will, then the Jets aren't going to go after a tackle, in free agency. So let's say they bring in Long, which they have. They still have Carpenter and Winters now. So that there's your threesome there. So unless they cut Carpenter, which they could, Carpenter has only $2 million in dead cap space and a $6.8 million cap hit. So if the Jets wanted to save even more money and didn't feel Carpenter fits the new scheme, they could let Carpenter go, and that still then opens up a spot where, let's just say, if they were interested in the Notre Dame offensive lineman and he was available at number 6 and couldn't get the quarterback they wanted, then that also becomes something that we can talk about later on. So unless they cut Carpenter, I think the Jets might be done on the offensive line, except for draft picks. And I'm not talking early draft picks.
I mean, again, like I said, I would not have a problem bringing Jensen in, especially if you can move along. You do mention that it creates a bottleneck, but in my opinion, is the offensive line was a weakness last year. You're looking to make it into a strength. And if you can bring in guys that upgrade the offensive line and still give yourself some decent backups to give yourself some depth, which also, as we've seen in the past, has been an issue.
Absolutely.
And you look back at the Jet teams of the recent history, even under prior Herm Edwards or under Rex, when you had the big names like Mawai and Faneca, the offensive line was a key strength, and it hasn't been lately, which has been a major impact both on the quarterback and on the running game. But and as you talked also in terms of, bringing in guys with pedigree and having a history, we talked about Tyrone Mathieu. He's a guy with history and pedigree. I know you've talked a little bit about Ndamukong Suh, and while I don't particularly like him from a character perspective, he definitely would provide another interesting dimension to the defensive line, where you can just put him to do one role and one role only, is to stop up the middle or create pressure in the middle, and then maybe bring in some defensive linemen or some other defensive linebackers that are outside passing rush backers. One guy I know that's been mentioned a lot lately is DaQuan Jones. That's a guy that's gotten a little bit mentioned that the Jets may be interested in.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
He can take
sure.
on multiple blockers. He can play line or end. He may be a cheaper version, not necessarily a talented version of Suh, but he's a guy that can maybe fill multiple roles, and that's the kind of guy that I'd kind of like to bring in to fill the offensive line role.
Yeah, I think
defensive
line. Yeah, I think that would be they're still going to add a couple of guys like that. There's still going to be a few guys that they should be able to afford, like DaQuan Jones, that will be really good players, depth players, rotation players, and that would make a lot of sense, no doubt about that. So yeah, look, I agree. Look, I would still prefer that they go after Jensen and stick him in there and almost use Long if they wanted to as as competition. Okay, best 5 guys win the job, that kind of thing. I'm okay with that. But again, I would think that if they go after Jensen, they would have to cut Carpenter. But let's also keep in mind with the new scheme, they're going to be running more athletic linemen. That's what they're going to be looking for. And when you do that, you have to keep in mind that it's easier to find those guys later on in the draft. The guys that are considered more stars, top draft picks, big time free agency guys, those are the maulers. Those are the guys that physically beat you down. It's a little bit easier to find guys, even in free agency, undrafted free agents. It's a little easier to find your offensive lineman when you're running, those zone running schemes. And that's maybe an advantage to a team that doesn't have the talent like the Jets don't have right now on the offensive line. So,
agreed. But like I said, I'd like to obviously cap constraints considered, and making sure you're not utilizing too much space for next year and the years after. If you can bring in a guy who would give you an upgrade, not just this year, but for several years to come and at a reasonable rate, which is like what any team's trying to do. But especially now where you have the cap space, take advantage of that cap space, front load some of the deals if you have to, thereby freeing up back end room and enabling yourself that if something goes, pear-shaped or sideways, you can get out of a bad contract without causing yourself too much dead cap space. And that's kind of where they're at right now. So Matthew's a guy I'd love to see. DaQuan Jones is a guy I'd love to see. Ryan Jensen is a guy I'd like to see. We talked about the tight end position. As we're on this call, Catanzaro actually signed with Tampa. So the Jets are now in the market for a kicker. So you wonder if it's going to be Ross Martin or another guy they bring in as a veteran.
Okay.
You and I had differing views on Catanzaro last year when he was brought in. You were 100% right. I was wrong initially. Catanzaro reverted to the good form that he showed in Arizona. So losing him is clearly a loss. But they're back in the market now to find themselves a kicker this year.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. And by the way, it's only Wednesday, so it doesn't mean that we won't be back over the next couple of days, depending on whether or not the Jets fill up the rest of their needs before the weekend. If they don't, then we'll be on again next week to update the rest of their spending spree. But it's very possible we'll talk again before the weekend, Jan, and we'll have a whole bunch of other moves to talk about, and then we can move on to the draft. So thanks a lot for checking in with us, and it's been a successful first day, official day for free agency for the Jets, and I look forward to talking to you again with more moves.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. So far, so good. Day one, good pivot and adjustment by Mikey Mack, bringing in veterans and bringing in guys that they needed, and now there's clearly some of the holes that they have to fill, and we'll see what the next couple of days of free agency brings.
All right. Thanks, Jan. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
All right, that's Jan Levine at AirJan23 on Twitter. You can catch him there. You can also catch us on Prime SN. And as I mentioned, we'll try to be back again in the next couple of days as long as the Jets make another couple of significant moves to update the roster and much more. We'll talk also with Dan Shonka tomorrow on our Let's Guide to the 2018 NFL Draft. So stay tuned for that. In a couple of weeks, we'll have our mock draft special as well here on the Our Lads Football Radio Network. For Jan Levine, I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for listening to Jets Uncovered. We'll see you next time.